Viewer discretion is strongly advised. What you're about to hear is not rumor, gossip, or tabloid fodder. It is the official, unfiltered federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as documented by Inner City Press. And in a twist no one could have predicted, Wendy Williams, the undisputed queen of daytime controversy, has now taken the stand. For decades, Wendy was dismissed as messy, dramatic, or exaggerated. But on this day, in a federal courtroom packed with attorneys, reporters, and stunned onlookers, she brought the receipts. This wasn't a radio rant. It wasn't a hot topic. It was sworn testimony, backed by evidence, delivered by a woman who had been hunted by the very machine she was now exposing. Wendy's testimony wasn't just about Diddy. It painted a picture of a culture, one riddled with intimidation, NDAs, and a silent pact among the powerful in hip-hop and entertainment. She spoke not only of Diddy, but of Jay-Z, R. Kelly, and the long trail of whispered warnings, silenced victims, and veiled threats that have echoed through the industry for years. She came with more than words. She came with proof. Dates, quotes, emails, transcripts from her old shows. Her recollection was vivid and chilling. She didn't just speak about the abuse of power. She mapped it out in ink and paper for the jury to see. When Wendy walked into that courtroom, it wasn't the arrival of a media personality. It felt like someone rising from the ashes, someone who had been buried in lawsuits, mockery, and blacklisting, clawing her way back to the surface just to tell the truth. She didn't show up for headlines. She came for justice. For years, they tried to silence me, she said, with threats, lawsuits, rumors, but I never lied. I was just early, with deliberate calm. She faced the jury and adjusted her mic. Then, she began, speaking of the behavior, the manipulation, the cover-ups. When I started talking about Diddy, I wasn't trying to destroy him. I wanted people to open their eyes. From the early 2000s, Wendy recounted how industry powerhouses shielded Diddy from scrutiny. You couldn't say his name on air without someone calling your station within the hour, she explained. She recalled how advertisers pulled out, station managers issued veiled threats, and she was warned again and again. But doing too much, Wendy. You're going to get hurt. She described being chased from a radio station by members of the girl group Total, allegedly sent by Diddy himself. I said they were broke. A few hours later, they were waiting outside my building. That's not a coincidence. That's coordination. Wendy likened her career to a battlefield. Every time I spoke the truth about Diddy's parties, about how he treated his artists, something in my life would fall apart. A sponsor would disappear. A network would ghost me. Still, she refused to fold. You can blackball me. You can smear my name. But you can't erase me. And now I'm under oath. So I hope they're listening, because I'm not stopping until the truth is louder than their machine. When the prosecutor asked about the culture that enabled Diddy, Wendy didn't hesitate. Her gaze sharpened. Her voice steadied, and she shifted the spotlight onto another name she'd long warned the world about, Jay-Z. And that's when the courtroom truly went silent. You can't talk about what Diddy did without talking about the people who stood beside him, grinning, nodding, while the abuse unfolded. And that, Wendy Williams made clear, includes Jay-Z. She leaned forward slightly, letting her eyes sweep across the jury box. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of her words landed like thunder. Y'all remember Foxy Brown? She asked, pausing just long enough for the name to settle in the air. She was 15. Jay-Z was 27, and he was everywhere with her. Then came the moment that made the courtroom shift in their seats. Wendy pulled out printed lyrics, lines from Foxy Brown's debut album. She held up the sheet for the jury to see. These are lyrics Jay-Z reportedly wrote, she said, her voice even but deliberate. Ain't no nump like the one I got. No one can expletive me better. She let the words hang, then asked, you tell me, why was a grown man writing that for a child? From there, when he walked the courtroom through details only someone deep inside the industry would know, stories whispered behind closed doors for years. Rumors of Jay-Z picking Foxy up from school, lavish gifts, shopping trips, hair appointments, everything paid for by a man nearly twice her age. This wasn't a record deal, she said plainly. This was grooming, but Wendy wasn't finished. She took it even darker. There was a tape, she said, lowering her voice. Jay-Z Foxy, Jamie Foxx. That rumor was around for years. Then just like that, it vanished. You never heard about it again. You know why? She paused, then answered herself. Because Foxy's home was burglarized. The tape? Gone. Coincidence? She didn't think so, and neither did the courtroom, now hanging on her every word. Wendy told the jury that she was fired from her top-rated radio show shortly after suggesting Jay-Z's relationships with underage girls should be investigated. They call me toxic, she said, but now you're seeing that every question I asked was worth asking. When the prosecution asked if she had any proof to support her claims, Wendy nodded. She referenced emails, phone logs, producers who abruptly backed out of her show the moment she brought up Jay-Z's name. His team made quiet calls, she explained, calls to people in power. And just like that, I was blacklisted. They didn't turn me into the villain because I was messy. They did it because I was right. And they couldn't let that truth spread. Then she turned back to the jury. Her tone softened, but her conviction remained sharp. I didn't lose sponsors because I stirred the pot. I lost them because I stirred the truth. Next came the part, she said, that nobody wanted to believe. The part that got her labeled a liar, a loudmouth, a troublemaker. I said at first, when he testified, those weren't parties. They were operations. She was referring to the now infamous freak-offs, a term central to the federal indictment against Diddy. Wendy recalled hearing whispers about them back in the late 90s when Bad Boy Records was at its peak. Guests had to surrender their phones. They signed NDAs. There were candle escorts, cameras, assigned rooms. This wasn't a house party, she said. It was a ritual. She referenced an interview with Karen Superhead Stevens, who had described on air how Diddy invited her to one of these gatherings, specifically requesting male involvement. Superhead didn't lie, Wendy said. She talked about the paranoia, the drugs, the bizarre setups. Diddy was terrified she'd expose him, and I made sure people heard that interview. I played it again and again because it was too heavy to ignore. She described hearing similar stories from both men and women who'd attended these gatherings. People who came back shaken, traumatized. They weren't partying, she testified. They were told what to wear, who to touch, which room to go to. It was scripted. It was controlled. Wendy said she personally spoke to 3 people who told her 4 bags were used after these events, just as described in the current indictment. They claimed there were medical assistants on standby. This wasn't entertainment, she said. It was organized depravity. She handed over a list, pseudonyms only, of people who had privately shared their stories with her. As she did, the courtroom fell silent. Their accounts, one by one, mirrored the stories from Cassie Ventura, Gondil, and others already on record. And then, the moment that brought the jury full circle. The baby oil, she said, shaking her head. I said on air once, joking, but it wasn't a joke. They really found over 1,000 bottles. You know how I knew? She stared directly at Diddy. Because people told me, and I was the only one willing to say it. Then she leaned back in her chair, composed, collected. Years of being silenced had led to this moment. All these years later, she said quietly, and we're finally here. Now, it wasn't gossip. It was evidence. As the courtroom fell into a deeper silence, Wendy Williams shifted her focus to someone she had long defended, Cassie Ventura. With her eyes locked on the jury, she spoke clearly, without hesitation. I said it back then, Wendy declared. Y'all were hypnotized by the diamonds, the music videos, the red carpet appearances. But I saw a scare girl. I saw imbalance. And I said it on the air. Something about that relationship was off. Wendy testified that as early as 2008, she had tried to warn her audience about what she called obsessive control, an unhealthy and dangerous dynamic between Diddy and Cassie. She was 19, Wendy said. He was nearly 40. That's not love. That's leverage. She explained how Diddy's world, his private jets, his 24-hour security, his grip on the music industry, created a prison Cassie couldn't easily escape from. I said it then, and I'll say it again. Cassie didn't need a boyfriend. She needed a bodyguard. Wendy reminded the court of an old interview clip she had played on her show. Cassie, eyes downcast, visibly flinching when Diddy raised his voice. People called it nerves, she said. I called it trauma, but nobody listened. Then came a critical moment in the trial. The prosecution entered into evidence a timeline of Wendy's past broadcasts and how they lined up with claims made in Cassie's lawsuit. I was told Diddy had access to her phones, that he'd show up at her hotel rooms unannounced, that staff had been instructed to unlock her doors. And when I said that on air, my show sponsors pulled the plug. Wendy referenced a 2018 incident, the one where Cassie reportedly ended the relationship after Diddy allegedly broke into her home. That wasn't the first time he showed up uninvited when he testified. People don't get it. When a mogul wants control, he doesn't ask for permission. He makes the world bend around him. She then broke down how these abusive dynamics often work in the entertainment industry. Grooming, isolation, manipulation, all masked by the illusion of luxury. He didn't just love Cassie, she said. He owned her. And when she broke the chain, she became a threat. Wendy paused. Her voice slowed, but her strength didn't waver. Everything in that lawsuit. I saw the signs. I spoke up. I went public. And now, she's finally being heard. But what cost? She adjusted her microphone again, letting her words linger. You don't talk about men like Diddy and walk away untouched, she said. I knew that, but I didn't understand how far they'd go until it happened to me. Wendy testified that in 2004, at the height of her radio career, she received a chilling message from a record label executive. Stop talking about Puff, or else. She ignored it. The following week, her prime afternoon slot was stripped away. They didn't even try to hide it, she said. It was punishment. When he told the court she'd learned through multiple sources that Diddy had made strategic phone calls to label executives, promoters, and radio networks, all urging them to distance themselves from her. One program director told me flat out, "You went too far. You poked the wrong bear." She recounted a terrifying incident when she was nearly attacked outside her radio studio by the girl group Total. Days earlier, she called them washed up and broke on air. And you think they just showed up randomly? She asked. No, they were sent. She painted the scene with striking detail. Fans crowding the glass walls of the station lobby, her intern panicking, her boyfriend idling in a car outside. That wasn't a confrontation, Wendy said. That was a message. A warning. They wanted me to know, we can get to you. She went on to describe how she was blacklisted, disinvited from BET events, denied media passes, stripped of major advertising deals. It was coordinated, she said. Diddy didn't just want to silence me. He wanted to erase me. Then, for the jury to see, she held up printed emails, correspondence from PR firms representing Bad Boy at the time. One email read, per client instruction, we will no longer be booking talent on Wendy Williams' show. She pointed to the signature. That client? She said, holding the page steady. Sean Combs. I wasn't the first to be blackballed, Wendy Williams said firmly. But I was one of the few who stayed loud about it. She turned to face the jury once more, her voice unwavering. That's what he does. If you speak up, you lose everything. Your mic, your money, your name. But I didn't fold. I kept talking through the silence. And here I am. Wendy paused, sitting still for a moment, then began recounting a time in her career that felt surreal in retrospect. We came from a very homosexual era in hip-hop, she said, quoting her own controversial words from years ago. That wasn't shade. That was truth. And for saying it, I was burned at the stake. She explained how, in the early 2000s, a silent but powerful effort took shape to protect certain stars by discrediting those who dared to question them. I had Charlemagne on the air with me, she recalled. Even back then, we knew what not to say if we wanted to keep our jobs. But I said it anyway. Wendy referenced her 2004 book, The Wendy Williams Experience, which included subtle nods and veiled warnings about powerful figures like Diddy and Jay-Z. Men whose personal lives, she suggested, were more complex than the public was allowed to see. People called it gossip, she said. But now, the government calls it evidence. She went on to describe a 2009 interview she conducted with former Bad Boy artist Mark Curry, who had just published Dancing with the Devil. In it, Curry referred to Diddy as the shadow that ruins people. Wendy agreed with him on air. And just like that, The interview vanished from the station's archives. Every time I gave a platform to someone critical of the industry, Superhead, Gene Deal, Jaguar Wright, I got pushback. Emails, threats, even FCC complaints, she told the court. They tried to shut me down from every angle. Then she said something that made the courtroom stir. There was a list, not one written down, but everyone in the industry knew it. A list of people you couldn't talk about. And when I broke that rule, I paid for it. She explained how her Hot Topics segments were constantly flagged for internal review, how show producers were intimidated by talent reps, and how network executives warned her, off the record, to back off. They told me I was going to ruin it, for them, for the station, for myself. But guess what? She said, pausing. It's ruined anyway, because the truth is out. Her voice dropped as she delivered one of the most powerful lines of her testimony. This trial isn't the beginning. It's the end of a cover-up. And I want the jury to understand, I've been sounding this alarm for 20 years. You all just finally heard it. Then, as she looked around the courtroom, Wendy's tone sharpened. Her delivery became colder, more deliberate. You think this is just about Diddy? She said, locking eyes with the jury. You're wrong. This is about the system that protected him. And that includes names you were never supposed to hear in a courtroom. She paused for impact, then named them. Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey. A stunned silence swept the room. The prosecution asked her to elaborate, and she did without hesitation. There's a list in Hollywood. Not one you'll ever see, not one you'll ever hold. But it's real. It's a list of people you don't cross. And if you do, you vanish. Wendy described the fallout from her radio segments, not just after speaking on Diddy, but after exposing how Tyler Perry allegedly blackballed her behind closed doors. I had sources, real ones, producers, agents. They told me flat out, Wendy, your name is being passed around. They don't want you touching certain topics. You're being labeled unstable. She explained how, after her public fallout with the Precious Team, a film backed by both Tyler Perry and Oprah, her career access collapsed. I went from being invited to red carpet premieres to being erased from the guest list overnight. One executive told me directly, Oprah's people don't want you near her anymore. That's power. And Wendy said that power wasn't just used to protect reputations. It was used to protect men like Diddy. Then came a deeply personal moment. Wendy testified that she once confided in Oprah privately about her own experience with abuse, hoping to find solidarity, maybe even support. But what she received in return was silence. She told me she respected me, that she'd never exploit my story, Wendy Williams said, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. And then the next thing I knew, my abuser was sitting on her show, being interviewed while I was being blackballed. She let the silence sit for a beat. That wasn't just betrayal, she continued. That was retaliation. The courtroom was stunned. The jury sat wide-eyed as Wendy peeled back layers few dared to expose. They smiled with him, she said. They posed for photos. They stood beside Diddy while the rest of us were getting crushed for speaking the truth. And she knew why. They needed him. For deals. For exposure. For silence. Then came a revelation that would shift the mood even further. Wendy revealed she had once received an email, forwarded to her by accident, from a PR firm that handled crisis communication for both Tyler Perry's studio and a brand affiliated with Bad Boy. The subject line read, Managing Optics, Wendy, Puff, Tyler. That's all it said, Wendy told the court, but that's all I needed. Her gaze sharpened. These aren't just random stars, she said. They're a machine that thrives on silence and chews up anyone who dares pull back the curtain. Tension gripped the courtroom. Then came the moment prosecutors would later call the turning point of her testimony, when he reached down and pulled out a thick file folder. This, she said, tapping its cover, is a collection of NDA email threads and internal memos that were never supposed to see daylight. She explained that she hadn't hacked or stolen anything. These documents were given to her by former insiders, people who had quietly exited the entertainment industry. They were tired, Wendy said. Tired of watching women disappear. Tired of seeing truth labeled as gossip. She opened the folder and began reading. The first document, an NDA from 2007. The name redacted. The wording ominous. Subject agrees not to disclose any private gatherings, recordings, or interactions with Mr. Sean Combs, his guests, or associates. Violation may result in financial penalties and public retaliation. When he looked at the jury, public retaliation, she repeated, slamming the document onto the table. That's how deep it went. Then she read from an internal email sent by a luxury hotel chain in 2015. We have prepared the presidential suite with all requested amenities, including extra linens, candlelight, and discretion measures. Mr. Combs' assistant will arrive ahead of guest entry for setup. Cassie, she noted, was still with Diddy at that time. You think this was just celebrity partying? She asked. No, this was a system, planned, funded, scheduled, and cleaned up. She revealed payment logs, evidence of money directed to publicists, talent managers, even bloggers, to manage the narrative. One email explicitly instructed a writer to avoid mentioning recent allegations and instead highlight Diddy's philanthropic contributions. Then came a photograph, entered into evidence by the prosecution. It showed Diddy, Tyler Perry, and a media consultant known for crisis control, smiling together at a 2019 gala. They were smiling, Wendy said softly, smiling while women were being paid to stay silent, and others were destroyed for refusing to sign. Wendy told the court that she too had been offered an NDA. They wanted me to shut up, she said. Told me I could have a nationally syndicated show if I just agreed to stop talking about certain people. She refused, and she paid the price. The jury sat in silence as Wendy delivered her final words in this part of her testimony. The silence they bought? It cost others their freedom, their peace, their truth. But now, it's all unraveling. She paused, one NDA at a time. As Wendy reached the end, she didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply sat with the weight of 20 years of warnings, ignored and dismissed. You see Diddy on trial, she said quietly. But I see something much bigger. This isn't just about what he did. It's not just about what he did, Wendy said. It's about who let him do it. She motioned toward the defense table. You see one man sitting there. But behind him is a legacy of silence, a tower built on fear, NDAs, power plays, party invites, and billion-dollar handshakes. Then she turned to face the jury. And every time someone tried to speak, that tower crushed them. Wendy reminded the court that while Diddy was the one on trial, others have been complicit: Jay-Z, Tyler Perry, Oprah, the labels, the handlers. They sat quietly. Some even witnessed the abuse. They shook his hand. They cashed his checks. And they made sure anyone who asked questions was pushed out of the room. She ended her testimony with the same voice that once ruled the airwaves: bold, unfiltered, and unapologetically raw. They call me bitter. They call me crazy. But I was right. And I'd rather be right in hell than stay silent in heaven. Then she turned to Diddy, who had remained mostly stone-faced throughout. You thought I was gone. You thought your power would be enough. But here you are, face to face with the truth. And I hope it's loud. Before stepping down, when he faced the gallery one last time, this trial isn't the end. It's the beginning. The start of people naming names, of walls cracking, and of that whole tower finally falling. And with that, she walked out,